lives. And in Ireland's case, it is a source of foreign direct investment, it's a source of employment. So if you look at technology, if you look at pharmaceutical and biotech, we have reasonably high levels of trust in those sectors, and I think that reflects the foreign direct investment story. We know the importance of foreign multinationals to our economy, and also we know the importance of them to our international reputation. I think there's a domestic read in here as well, and that is if you look at food and beverages performing reasonably well. So companies like Kerrygood, companies like Glanbia, which are a central part of our productive indigenous economy, are important to our international reputation. They are just as important to our international reputation. We trust them highly as well. So it's not just the international players. There is a very strong domestic economic story, and there is strong domestic good news going on in this economy as well, which is contributing to our overall perceptions of trust. Of all the slides, this is probably one of the most complex, but it is probably one of the most positive. This is a perception of Ireland as a place to do business. I'm just going to point out a couple of things about it. 17 out of 23 countries, I think, are more trusting of us than distrusting. So you look at the two colours there, you can see 2009 and you can see 2011. Quite clearly the trend is downward. Our international reputation has taken somewhat of a battering. But trust is holding up reasonably well. The majority of countries still see Ireland internationally as a good place to do business. They still have confidence in our business systems. Our two closest trading partners, if you look at them as well, the UK and the US, are holding up particularly well. The US, I think, is extraordinary over the last 3 years, how strong that is. It's only changed by a couple of points, and it's still over 50%. So there is very good news there in terms of the UK, in terms of the US, and also internationally. On the extreme right, probably not much of a surprise, you can see Germany. It's down 23%, and I suppose there's a very simple reason for that, and that is, well, who's going to write the cheque for our bailout? They are highly distrusting of Ireland as a place to business. They were very trusting, and it is quite a dramatic change. But overall, and again, I think Barry will talk to us about this, our international reputation is still holding up quite well, despite all of the bad news that has come out of Ireland. We just put this in, it's just interesting to have a look at, well, what is the purpose of business? And there's a quote there, the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. And you can see Ireland there in the red, exactly the same again as the UK. Really what this is saying to us is that we expect more than just bottom line profits for business. We're in a recession, so businesses are naturally focusing on their bottom line. But we're actually expecting more from business. We're expecting profits with purpose. We're expecting business to engage with government, to engage with communities, to solve the problems, to become an active agent in our economy, to do more than just look at its own sphere of operation, but to look at the wider canvas of the country and to be actively involved in delivering solutions for our economy. Not surprisingly, you look over at the extreme left, United Arab Emirates, that's a very different economy, and the expectations of business there are entirely different. It's also a very different system of government. Really, this slide here tells us, well, what makes up a company's reputation, and we've categorized it in a number of different ways. At the top, you will see, is a company I can trust, 77%. What that really means is, before any of us will engage with a company or a brand, we have to trust it. We won't even engage with it or listen to it unless we trust it. Offers high quality products and services. Well, it's not really surprising that we expect business to do that. Treats its employees well, and also has transparent and open business practices. I think the need for transparency in business is very clear in this study, and very clear to us all, given what has gone on. What's interesting about all of that is they're what we would call more soft assets of a business. So really, if you take the Milton Friedman point on the slide before, what we're saying here is we're expecting a lot more again from business than simply bottom line management. It's interesting if you look at the very bottom of that slide, it delivers consistent financial returns to investors at 37%. Now, I think it would be very naive to say that we don't expect business to deliver profits. Of course, we do expect business to deliver profits. But in our overall mix of what makes up the reputation of a business, it is not the most important factor anymore, and by a long way. And that is quite a considerable change. It's also an international trend. It's happening with businesses internationally. If you looked at this slide for the US, it would be pretty well identical, and you can see the percentages there as well for the global comparisons. So now turning just to the second last institution we look at, which is the media. What we can say about the media, Ireland is there in the centre, 33 to 38. A modest gain in the media overall. I'm sure Gerard will have strong views on this, but what we're really saying here is, in some ways, the media has contributed to the change in Ireland's international reputation. There has been plenty of bad news. The media has focused on that bad news to an extent they've almost gorged on it at times, and so often from a business perspective, the good news has been really challenged to get out and to be heard. And that has changed our reputation. Equally, you could say about the media, don't shoot the messenger, they're only reporting what goes on. But overall, we are generally sceptical about the media, as we are sceptical with all of the main institutions of our society. So if we don't trust the media overall, we still consume it, and we still read newspapers, we still listen to radio news. So what do we actually trust? And I think this is quite an interesting slide, because the percentages are still low, but of the sectors we have confidence in, newspapers, television and radio, we are still highly trusting of them, of sources of information. I think what's quite interesting is if you look at online multiple sources and social media, while they rank much lower than traditional print and broadcast media, I think what we would say about this and how we would interpret this is there's a clear message for businesses here that if you combine those multiple sources and online social media, and you aggregate them, your percentages, or the percentages of trust will be driven up. There's an onus on companies to be media companies here. We would say to companies and brands that every company needs to be a media company. That means you need to engage with your stakeholders through the online and social media, new media as it's still called, but it isn't really new media. And there is an onus on you to use that, to use your own websites, to use online, to use social media to your advantage, and also to talk quite clearly through traditional media. So every company has to be a media company. It's no longer about what the Star prints about you or what the Irish Times prints about you. That is still critically important, but equally what is being said about you through these channels is critically important to trust. We just took a brief look then and say, okay, well, where do we go for sources of information? And what we looked at was the first and secondary source here for information. And it really shows the primacy of online at 32%, and then the company's website at 19%. I think that amplifies the 19% and the company's website, sort of amplifies the onus on companies to be media companies, to engage wherever their stakeholders are, and your multiple audiences are listening to you and looking at you and your brands through multiple sources, and conversations are very much instant. So as a primary source and secondary source, we can see that online has a very strong influence. We also looked at the types of sources you consult for information about businesses in crisis, and you can see the finding for that there in the circle. What's interesting here is this is an unprompted question. So we said, where do you go for information about companies, about brands? So this is an unprompted question. I think what's very interesting here is if you look at the US, you look at the UK, and you look at Ireland, and you look at what's number one, and I think you could even say in Google we trust, because Google is quite clearly the number one source. And what's really interesting in that, Google is now a trusted destination and source of information. So we will go to Google as a trusted destination, and we will also pretty well believe what we find there. And that's interesting when you think of what Google actually is. And it shows very much the primacy of search. Some very strong brands coming out in Ireland as well. And I suppose this is primarily about business, so that's probably why the star isn't there. If it was more general, I'm sure the star would be there, but this is where we go for business news and business information. So the Irish Times still very, it's low, but it's still, in comparison to the overall sector, it features very strongly. RTE, the Financial Times and the BBC. So we look for sources of information. I think the Financial Times appearing there is quite interesting as well, because so often many of us, particularly in the business world, I think a lot of people have looked to the Financial Times for an unbiased read of what is going on in Ireland, because the media in Ireland has been so fixated on reporting the challenge we face in a particular way. So a lot of people have gone to the Financial Times as an independent view of what is going on in the country. Final sector we look at is non-governmental organisations. As I said earlier on, they are the most trusted institution globally. In Ireland, 53% in Ireland. I think what's quite interesting here, what we haven't put up the Ireland findings here, but you just look at India and China, and really what that is saying to us is the breakthrough of NGOs is quite considerable. And it's very interesting that NGOs are functioning effectively in places like China. Really what this is showing us is that NGOs have now consolidated as international brands. With high trust levels comes challenges. We now have an expectation of NGOs. We expect NGOs to deliver. We expect NGOs to engage in society and to be active agents for change and to deliver tangible benefits, not just in crisis situations, but in solving social problems and in solving political and economic problems. That's really the end of the data part of the presentation. I think what we see here is Ireland is in the grip of a trust crisis that started last year and the year before, and it is continuing. We're expecting purposeful engagement from business. We want business to engage. We want it to be accountable also. Government has a very big challenge in this country. It has to rebuild trust in a way that it has never had to do it before, because trust has been utterly lost in government. People are sceptical about media organisations, and there is a need for companies and brands to respond to that, as I said, and to manage their engagement and the dialogue by becoming their own media companies to an extent. And finally, the damage has been more internal than external. Ireland is still seen as a very good place to do business. Our international reputation has been hit. There is a compelling need for a positive story from government, from media and from business in Ireland to be told internationally, and there is a receptive audience. So that's really the end of the findings. Jerry is going to look at those findings now for us, and Jerry heads up our global public affairs, our political business based in Washington. So he'll give us a perspective from working with multinationals all the time about Ireland, and many of those multinationals who he works with are present in Ireland, and also look at the roadmap to trust.